he may yet succeed in pulling the U.S. into war. I think Trump is trying to resist it. This is the good news. There have actually been now meetings, negotiations between the U.S. and Iran.
Recently, Jeffrey Sachs was on Andrew Napolitano's podcast talking about two possible scenarios that could unfold regarding Iran. The first being a potential war with Iran, which much of the Israel lobby wants. They want military strikes as soon as possible. And then there is a group within the government that wants a peace deal with Iran that would give the U.S. and Israel assurances that it would dismantle its nuclear weapons program to the extent that that exists. So I want to hear what Jeffrey Sachs says about it. Let's watch and let's react.
Getting to Iran, which is the subject matter, will Netanyahu attack Iran if Donald Trump says we're not doing it and we're not going to back you militarily?
You know, the hold of the Israel lobby on American politics is so frightening, so terrifying, that anything is possible to drag the United States into yet another war. Our politicians have sold themselves to the Israel lobby. They're on the take. They take big bucks. They get big bucks. By the way, not only from Jewish Zionists, but from Christian Zionists. So just to understand, this is a lobby that wants to turn American policy over to Israel. And it has effectively done that for 30 years. The U.S. has gotten dragged into one war after another because Israel has said so. And by Israel, I mean the Netanyahu era, because Netanyahu has dominated Israeli politics basically since 1996.
Yeah, this is true. It's hard to argue against the fact that the U.S. at least partially got sucked into wars with Syria, with Iraq, and with Libya because of the Israel lobby. Now, there are other factors involved here, but Sachs also makes an interesting point, too, is that, you know, people talk about Zionism sometimes as if it's only Jewish people supporting it and championing it. But really, it's a lot of Christian Zionists as well, some of which believe that, you know, a modern Israel state that exists outside of the realm of the Bible is necessary to bring about the second coming. So there are a lot of Christian Zionists too, and it's hard to make a good argument against what Sachs is saying here.
And he's pulled the U.S. into one war after another. Now, in the last week, it was made explicit by President Trump and others that Netanyahu is trying to pull the U.S. into an attack on Iran. The kind of attack that could start World War III. We should always remember Iran has a strategic alliance with Russia, for example, and Iran itself is, despite the rhetoric, a powerful country with a powerful ability to respond to an attack. And so Israel is, under Netanyahu, is an extremist rogue nation, but it has so much power in Washington because of how corrupt Washington is that the answer to your question is he may yet succeed in pulling the U.S. into war. I think Trump is trying to resist it. This is the good news. There have actually been now meetings, negotiations between the U.S. and Iran that, by the announcement of both sides, are making some progress.
So two things. One is that Netanyahu has said essentially he wants the Libyan model for Iran. Well, what happened there? That's where the U.S. and NATO launched an aggressive war, not a defensive war, against Muammar Gaddafi's regime to remove him from power and completely dismantle that regime. And then we ended up with open-air slave trading in Libya. That's the model that he's explicitly said he wants for Iran. So we know where he stands. We know where the most rigid and zealous Zionists stand on that. Also, Sachs makes a good point there when he talks about the strategic alliance between Russia and Iran. We know what happened when Russia and the U.S. both got into squabbles over Syria. Actually, that's when Putin became persona non grata of the U.S. state. Before that, actually, a lot of presidents said glowing things about Putin. Like Bush said, I looked into his eyes and saw a decent man, right? But Syria's regime change operation that the U.S. wanted as part of Operation Timber Sycamore, where the U.S. teamed up with Al-Qaeda against the Assad regime, was denied by Russia. And after that, all bets were off. Putin was a madman that was going to reconstitute the Soviet Union, take over, and become a new Hitler. That's what we've seen. That's what we can't accept when it comes to Iran, because that could open up the floodgates to another greater war.
Netanyahu's having a fit over this. No doubt the Israel lobby is working overtime to try to destroy these negotiations. So this is a perilous time because Israel's on a rampage. It is, of course, committing mass murder in Gaza. It is trying to engage in ethnic cleansing in both Gaza and the West Bank. It is expropriating violently lands also in the West Bank. It has invaded Lebanon. It has invaded Syria. And it's aiming for war with Iran. So given that recklessness and given Netanyahu's out of control recklessness within Israel, firing the head of intelligence, absolutely dividing his own country, but controlling our politicians, this is an extraordinarily dangerous moment.
The Israel lobby in Washington is apparently working in overdrive. The White House announced just about an hour ago the appointment of someone I've never heard of. Her name is Merav Seren, first name Merav, surname Ceren, to head the Iran-Israel desk on the National Security Council. Now, you might say, well, who is she? She's a joint United States and Israeli citizen and a former official of the IDF. Now, why would Donald Trump authorize Michael Waltz to hire a former official of the IDF to purport
of the Israeli Ministry of Defense? Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Right. To purport to advise the President of the United States on Iran and Israel relations. What kind of advice does he think he's going to get from her?
You see, it's not even remotely subtle how the Israel lobby works. Why not just put Israelis into the National Security Council? we can cut out all of the middlemen, as it were. Now, who is she? She is Israeli-born, apparently dual citizenship, as you say. Apparently, I don't know that fact. She worked for the Israeli Ministry of Defense, no less. And then she showed up on Ted Cruz's staff. And this is how it works. Ted Cruz receives a fortune from the Israel lobby. A fortune. According to OpenSecrets.org, which records these things, in the most recent campaign cycle, if I recall the data correctly, more than $1 million from pro-Israel lobby groups. So,
yeah, you just can't make this up. He's so right. This isn't even subtle. It's a huge conflict of interest, even if legal. To introduce someone that was a high-ranking official in the Ministry of Defense onto the National Security Council, you're not even being subtle about the Israeli influence in government. And meanwhile, all the mainstream media and Zionist sites publish about how big of a threat Qatari influence is in the United States. When you put literal Israeli defense ministers, former ones, on the National Security Council, it's crazy. It's a revolving door in the same way that the regulatory apparatus is. Someone connected to the Israeli government gets into a Zionist campaign works for a politician and then gets right into government. This is ludicrous. We don't need it. And if we had a just and open journalistic trade in the U.S., more people would be reporting on it. But they're not. You only see people like Ryan Grimm reporting on it right now, from what I've seen. And I'm sure there will be more, but this is just crazy.
Basically, this is a scam operation. Our politicians have sold themselves out to the Israel lobby. They hire people who have, well, I don't know what she has, except that she apparently is an Israeli citizen who has worked for the Israeli Ministry of Defense. Shocking enough, completely unacceptable for also for a president who says that his aim is America first.
Does she get a national security clearance? Can she see state secrets in her job at the National Security Council? She who must still enjoy some loyalty to the Israeli Defense Ministry?
No doubt. In Washington, everything's for sale, including American foreign policy. And Israel has controlled it, and it has dragged us into one war after another. And today's news with this is unbelievable. How are we going to extricate ourselves from this? Where is America first? Where is foreign policy for the United States interest?
So
it's in the garbage bin, and it will be there as long as the U.S. State, the U.S. administration, and the U.S. deep state are controlled by the Israel lobby. We know that. John Mearsheimer wrote an incredible book on that. If you haven't read that yet, I really recommend it. But even in the years since, we've learned more and more about it. Massey's revealed that every congressman has essentially an AIPAC assigned agent to keep them in line. Of course, not him, though, because he resists that. He's the only one, as far as it seems to me. So we know how much the Zionist lobby owns U.S. politicians. This is crazy. The real America First principle is getting out of the Middle East completely. Don't choose a side. Don't choose Palestine. Don't choose Israel. Support a two-state solution if you can bring it about diplomatically. You can't bring it about militarily. That's what we know from the last 6 decades.
I want to talk to you about Rome. Because over the weekend in Rome, Steve Witkoff, the president's emissary, the almost de facto Secretary of State, met with the Iranian foreign minister. The Iranian foreign minister came out of the meeting and said, we are very close to an agreement. We're going to have our technical people get together and agree on the numbers and the process for enrichment. Now, this is not the deal that Netanyahu wanted. Netanyahu wanted zero enrichment, but obviously much of enriched uranium is used for peaceful purposes, like hospitals use it for certain nuclear tests that are taken of the human heart. Will a JCPOA-like agreement championed by Donald Trump temper the bellicosity of Netanyahu, or is he going to start a war with Iran no matter what? Because no war, no premiership, very little freedom for Bibi.
Look, the situation in Ukraine and in Iran, or with U.S. policy, is comparable. We have, in both cases, abandoned U.S. interests in recent years. And Trump, in the case of Ukraine, is doing the right thing absolutely to extricate us from a war that he accurately calls Biden's war. And so...
Yeah, I think he's being way too charitable about that. I hope that's true, but from what we've seen so far, it's take the funding away from Zelensky for a few days and then send it all back and maybe try to tie ourselves to Ukraine even further via this minerals deal. And, have this, slight kind of modified agreement with Russia not to attack power infrastructure and for Ukraine not to attack power infrastructure in Russia-occupied territory. But other than that, we've had Biden-era status quo stalemate. Now, I hope that changes. At least Trump is talking to Lavrov and the Russians. Let's hope for a peace there. But I'm not as charitable on Trump in that regard as Sachs, but I hope that it gets better. That's all I'll say about it.
If Trump follows the same logic with regard to Iran, yes, he can do it, because Israel and Ukraine cannot do anything of all of their big talk about fighting Russia or fighting Iran without the United States. The whole game has been that U.S. foreign policy has been profoundly misused. If Trump says it's in the U.S. and, by the way, global interest to make an agreement with Iran that ends Iran's nuclear program, and that, according to the technical experts that will meet next, protects against any kind of breakout on that. And that's what the Iranians are putting on offer. If Trump does that, no, Netanyahu cannot go to war with Iran as long as the president of the United States asserts American foreign policy, not Israeli foreign policy.
Yes, Sachs is totally right here. The U.S. is the world empire, right? And the U.S. views both Israel and Ukraine as pieces on a grand chessboard of the world empire. Now, I think it's also true that both Israel and Ukraine views the U.S. as the king piece or the queen piece on that board too, and that's another matter. But there's no question that it's the U.S. drive to fulfill these military operations, these proxy wars, kind of these geopolitical bellicose campaigns. It's the U.S. that bankrolls them all. And if the U.S. pulls out of them, which we should be able to have the sovereignty and autonomy to do that, I know it never seems like that, especially in my lifetime, because the Israel lobby and the military-industrial complex seems to run the show more than our elected officials. But that's the case. So I really hope that happens with Iran. I hope they create a new deal that satisfies and quells the animosities of many sides. I don't think that's really possible for Netanyahu and the Likud party, but I sure hope it's possible when it comes to the warmongers in Washington. We already know how some of them have reacted to the news that Trump is negotiating with Iran directly. Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin panicked like their life was in danger when you started to see this happen. But the true America First crowd that doesn't want saber rattling in the Middle East would benefit profusely from this.
This is the job of the president of the United States. Maybe Trump's going to get it right on these two huge issues. If he does, I would just suggest make it 3 out of 3, because the same applies for Palestine. What we need for peace, and the whole world is saying it, except for Netanyahu and the Israel lobby, is we need a state of Palestine living alongside a state of Israel. This is the whole story for peace in the Middle East. Actually.
Is that a pipe dream, Jeff, or is it potentially realistic?
Not only is it realistic, there's one vote only that separates us today from peace, and that is the U.S. veto in the UN Security Council that blocked Palestine becoming the 194th UN member state.
Because of the iron grip that the Israel lobby has on American foreign policy. You've just explained that.
Precisely. It's one vote. It's our vote. Israel has no veto over a state of Palestine. The International Court of Justice ruled last year that Israel's boundaries are the boundaries of the 4th of June, 1967, period. The United Nations, by an overwhelming majority, 95% of the world's population, has called for there to be a state of Palestine. There is a high-level meeting at the UN, June 17 to June 20, to implement the two-state solution. More than 180 countries support this. In fact, Israel does not. Okay, that's Israel's or Zionism's, this extreme Zionism's radicalism. It's reckless. It's illegal. It has led Israel into making horrific war crimes to try to defend an indefensible position.
So a few things. So Sachs seems to predicate a lot of his attitudes towards supporting a two-state solution on international sentiment, the UN, previous resolutions and such. And I tend to agree with kind of the basis for those resolutions, but I would never predicate my stance on support for the two-state solution on kind of a globalist body like this. I do still support it, but it's out of America first. It's out of that sentiment and not what the UN wants, because, Zionists and non-Zionists both pick and choose what they like about the UN, or they tend to do this because Zionists predicate the legitimacy of Israel in general on UN resolutions, and a lot of non-Zionists predicate their attitudes toward Israel and Israeli aggression on violating Resolution 242, which sets those boundaries. And Sachs is right about what the UN has said after the 6-day war and what the established territories are. But just from an American perspective, as someone that cares about this issue, doesn't want to plunge our posterity into debt, doesn't want to get embroiled in all these new Middle Eastern wars that have transpired ever since the U.S. got involved in Israel, we should support a two-state solution, or at least try to facilitate the path to it. Several presidents have feigned trying to do this, but it's always loaded with these poison pills that Israel has put into some of those prospective deals, where there'll be more military occupation of Gaza and things like that. And then when the Palestinians reject it, they say, they won't accept a two-state solution. They don't want it. But it's not because of the UN and the number of international countries that Americans should support it. It's to get us out of this catastrophe that we've been in ever since, fighting over territory that isn't our fight. And Hamas doesn't threaten the US, no matter how evil you may think Hamas is. And I think some of their attacks have been really barbaric. But there's no sense for US involvement there. The extension of thinking that they're barbaric would mean the application of U.S. military everywhere else in the world that takes place. And the world is a violent and sinister place in many regards, I hate to say.
But the point is that the world, other than Israel and other than the U.S. veto, are essentially unanimous on the way forward. So the United States blocked it by itself last year when this issue came up in the UN Security Council. There were 12 votes for Palestine to become the 194th UN member state. There were 2 abstentions, and there was 1 veto, the United States. We blocked the peace. All President Trump needs to do is change 1 vote. And then what he does is recognize that the whole world, other than the Israel lobby, has called for 2 states, the International Court of Justice, the UN Security Council, the UN General Assembly, and this is very important for everybody to understand. So too has the Arab League, all the countries, the Arab countries of the Middle East. So too have the 57 Islamic majority countries in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC. In other words, this is not some pipe dream. We're the only blockade of this. Now you have someone from the U.S., from the Israel Defense Ministry inside the White House in charge of policy. And my God, are we going to get peace that way, or are we going to get perpetual war? Whose foreign policy interest are we going to get? Because the United States could satisfy American security and could align with the whole world by changing one vote.
Well, Sachs is right about that. I'm not sure how feasible it is to change that one vote until the Israel lobby is severely diminished in power. And I don't have all the answers on how to do that. I do think there are cracks in that edifice, though, in terms of the kind of propaganda campaign to support it and support that somehow funneling billions of dollars to Israel is American first. I think that there is some cracks in the foundations of those arguments. And, you know, the alternative media and some of the independent podcasters and people like that are bringing those things to mind. But until the Zionist lobby's influence is reduced, and it hasn't been reduced in this administration, that's for sure, I don't see how that ever can come to be. As to the question of, is that a pipe dream, a two-state solution at this point? Well, sometimes I kind of think it is, but then other times I look back through the lessons of history and see all the times where there were two countries close to each other, or two different sects of people within the same country at times, that couldn't get along, killed each other in droves, murdered each other, enslaved each other, but now are under peaceful terms. And I think that might be possible again. I mean, I look at, you know, England and Ireland. There was lots of problems between those two countries for a long time. The classic enemies that were France and England for so many years. Japan and China had long-term animosities for so long. The U.S. and Britain, long-term animosities that culminated in two large conflicts. And for a while, you know, the British were impressing American sailors into the British Navy. That's what led largely to the War of 1812. So there are some of these matters historically where at that time people would have looked at them and said, there's no chance for peace here. There's just barbarism on both sides, or on one side, or this has become partisan for many decades, where they were solved. So let's hope it happens. Let's hope the Iran deal happens. Again, it's going to be interesting to see what's in this deal, because Trump and a lot of his Republican supporters certainly panned, I think many of them for partisan reasons, Barack Obama's Iran deal. And certainly the hardest core Zionists didn't like that deal because it didn't go far enough, and they just wanted to militarily strike Iran, and many of them still do. But we'll have to see what happens. I'm hoping for a peace deal, not more saber rattling. And then in the periphery of all these discussions is what's going to happen with Hegseth, because there's a lot of rumors that he might be gone soon. There's a lot of this story about a second Signal chat leak revolving around him, which I'm following, but it seems a little fishy to me. It seems like there might be a campaign to drive him out, because supposedly he was one of the people in the administration that went to Trump behind closed doors and tried to talk him out of greenlighting a strike on Iran by Israel. So we'll have to see what happens there. But what do you think down below? Will there be a military strike on Iran, or a peace deal with Iran first between the US and Iran? Let me know. I want to hear your thoughts. This one could come down to the wire. And until I talk to you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, no more empire. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good one. Thanks so much for watching.